I'd like to talk a little bit more about maturing and maturity.
Yeah?
Usually that term is used with a natural evolution or a natural evolving process of something as it continues on its life cycle. Or a kind of understanding that has a perspective. It sounds as if it's something that happens as opposed to generating or introducing a kind of efforting or a industriousness to pursue that. Or
Sure. Yeah, it just happens. And it's not particularly important anyway because it's theoretical. I mean, you're in your particular experience in real time, and that's all that really matters. And then whether or not you can sort of theorize about maturing and all this is kind of an abstraction. But we can observe that, as we are with our experience, there's a certain degree of tendency, let's say, to explore it, to investigate it, to be with it more profoundly and more subtly in various ways, various aspects. And so it can be meaningful to think of that as a maturing of experience, learning to be with itself more profoundly, more genuinely, let's say. Which is analogous to the sort of maturing that happens in being with a life form in a life situation, like with human beings. As an organism grows, it learns to be what it is more and more profoundly and fully and more multidimensionally. But again, that's really only passingly of interest, sort of theoretically, because in point of fact, it's irrelevant. The only important thing is this experience here, and it is as it is, and whether or not it's a maturing is just something you can notice sort of in passing as a point of interest, maybe.
Well, I am aware many times of a kind of dullness or reducing down a everyday participation in ongoing way I find myself, and I must be doing that. I mean, I know that I'm doing that. So it's like there's so much more than that.
Yeah, but it's not about more or less. It's about what anything is. What the dulling down is just as fundamentally amazing as what the more and opening is. All of this being with opening and being with expanse and being with more and all of that is just about discovery. It's not about achieving a superior condition. The condition of being shut down and little and stupid is exactly as miraculous as the condition of being open and perceptive and engaged. It's that it exists at all that's the amazing thing. And the only advantage whatsoever of openness is just discovering that fact. But in itself, it's not actually a superior condition and nothing to be aspired to. So in other words, it's what experience is that matters, that is important. It doesn't matter at all how it is or what it looks like. More mature is not better than less mature. But in more mature, there's arguably a greater potentiality of discovering what it is. But it's the discovery that matters, not the functionality. I mean, you can be a complete spiritual boob and be a total jerk and be oblivious and all of that other stuff, and it doesn't matter in the least if you stumble on what this is. You stumble on the fact of this astounding apparition occurring in this astounding consciousness. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter how you are with it then. It's not a matter of achieving a polished being with it, being with it more or better or something like that. It's kind of hard to convey, I guess. It's easy to think clearer and more open and more, whatever is better. And it's only really better in one sense, as strategically it may be a more opportune mode of discovering, of stumbling on what this is. But in itself it means nothing. And once you stumble on what this is, you don't need to hold it or retain clarity of it or anything. You totally let go of it. You don't give a shit. Because you see that whatever it looks like, it doesn't actually lose or gain anything whatsoever. So it doesn't need to be particularly functional or clear or engaged or noticing or anything. I don't feel like I'm putting this very clearly. Oh well.
No, it's just another way of poking in.
So the point is that in the moment, jump on what this is. What is this? What is this? That's all. That's all that matters. You don't need to stay with it. You don't need to, master it. You don't need to retain it. Just see it. What is it? Well, it's showing up. That's what it is. It's showing up. That's the whole thing that it is. It is that it is showing up. And how it's showing up is clear in the showing up. Not that you can say anything about it, but that's all there is. That's all there is. And that's all that matters. And you can see that anytime because it's always equally true. And it's actually no less true when you're obscured and contracted and identified and all those other things as it is when you are open and unidentified and spacious and transcendental and what have you.
Well, it just showing up.
Yeah.
Is one thing.
Yeah. That's the only thing, but
Well,
yeah.
That coming here.
You're saying it's something, but then you mentioned identity or identifying. I mean, there's still that aspect of it. You can see it just.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. That only matters, again, don't confuse strategies of noticing this versus what it is or what it needs in order to be what it is. It doesn't need unidentification. You can identify all you want and be realized. If you're used to being identified, in unidentification, it may be strategically of use in terms of stumbling on this, noticing what it is, but it's not actually any kind of a superior condition. So again, it's important not to confuse that. It's important not to misunderstand that. So, in other words, there's tactics, and the tactics are all geared towards one thing, not the achievement of some degree of functionality, but the tactics are all geared towards just discovering what this is.
That it is.
That it is what it is.
It's what it is. Just that it is.
Yeah. It's totally irrational. It's not something that you'll be able to write a dissertation on or say anything about, but it's just this flashbulb of nowness going off in the present moment. That's the whole shooting match.
It is?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
But it's always been that.
Yeah, it's always been that. Yeah.
Stay with that. Stay with that. Don't you?
Yeah.
There's something more.
No. The something more is it. It seems to be something more because what it is intrinsically open-ended, intrinsically infinite. So it always has, it's like fractal, it's not like you ever get to the end of it. But it's not a more that's somewhere else. It's a more that is it here, and what this is, just this flash, is a fractal flash that is intrinsically more than itself. But it's not more in the sense of, you got to go over there to find it, or you got to get bigger to find it. It's a more in the sense that what it is more. Always more. You never get to the end of it. How do you get to the end of infinity? But it's this infinity right here. It's this completely obvious, naked, present infinity that we're talking about, not some infinity that's long ago and far away and way out there that you have to, build your spaceship and fly into or something. It's just this flash right here. This is it. That's the entire story, all the fuss. Every word I've ever spoken in these contexts has been trying to indicate this one flash that is here now.
It's possible to appreciate, recognize, and be blown away by the thisness, the isness of this happening just right now.
Yeah, sure.
Without a sense of infinity.
Sure.
Like infinity can be a perspective of that if you take a
infinity. Totally. Infinity is not important. It just happens to be the case. And if you look into it, you go, oh yeah, sure, it's infinite. But it's not like, who gives a shit? You can't make it not infinite, so it's not like it's an issue. And it's not like you need to notice that it's infinite, but you can if you care to look, because it happens to be the case. But it's not important that it's infinite. It just happens to be the case. Like it's not important that it's radiant. It just happens to be the case that it is. It might not be radiant, and you'd just be sitting in infinite dark void forever. But it happens to be radiant, so it looks like all this shit all the time. But the only event is this radiance right now, this flash. And yeah, sure, it's intensely patterned, and yeah, sure, it seems to be meaningful, and yeah, sure, it's blah 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 blah. It seems to have all these qualities, and yeah, sure, it seems to be infinite, and blah blah blah. But that's not important. That just comes with. That's just aspects of what it happens to be. The point is just this, right? When I say this is the this I'm talking about, not that this. It's very, very simple.
It's way too simple.
I'm sure you'll find a way to complicate it. No, but the thing is, it's simple, but it's endlessly. If you want complexity, you can find as much as you want in it, because again, it happens to be infinite. So you can be with it as complicatedly as you want to, but it never departs from itself. It still is just this flash, even when you're with it as complexity and as infinity and so on and so forth.
I've been sort of trying to, well, not trying, but noticing that, my take on this is a completely individual experience too. So, I've been around you quite a bit, and then I've heard a lot about light and infinity and flashes and radiance and on and on and on. And so I've been trying to kind of like take a good look and see like from where this appears to be looking from this point of view, like how that, given that, you know, I have different parameters to do with, you know, breath and sensitivity and awareness and light and on and on and on, how that looks.
Yeah.
You know, just to sort of individualize that. If
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
What I say doesn't matter at all.
Right.
It's what's there. What's there is actual. What I say over here is just theoretical as far as you're concerned. So it's all about owning, you seeing what your experience is.
And that's sort of quite a fun, you know. I mean, it's about my own journey, as it has been and as it is every day, because it keeps showing up somehow.
Yeah.
You know, to sort of look around and see like, oh, yeah, you know. And that's been great, because it kind of, what I feel is like this cutting of all strings, you know, to do with interpretation or the past or people, places and things, or how I think that other people are seeing things, because in fact there are no other people there. And, you know, just sort of like, you know, especially if I'm out in nature, then I really get to see that in a sort of very raw, present way. That is, it's very freeing.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the essence of it, is to discover, you know, what interpretation is, and then in that context you can see what is being interpreted. Because there is an actuality, and all interpretations are of that actuality, but the interpretations are just basically hypothetical, even though we may be used to taking them as if they were gospel.
Habitual,
But noticing what is being interpreted, which is just this flash of present experience that is yours, versus the interpretations. But it consists of people or worlds or environments or history or, you know, blah 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 blah, whatever. And to notice that, and to, again, as a way of seeing because what is being interpreted is reality. That's the actuality. And then the interpretations are fine. You can play with them any way you want. It's convenient. But, you know, just to even notice that there is a difference. There actually is something that is actual, that is being interpreted. And then all of the ways that it's held to be are abstractions or interpretations of this actuality. And to be able to see that those two realms, those two worlds, the world of actuality and the world of interpretations,
which is very hard to take apart, because they're both integral.
Yeah, and we're used to, because what's being interpreted. Because what is being interpreted is right here. So what is being interpreted is actual.
Yeah.
But what is being interpreted does not correspond to our interpretations. In other words, our interpretations are always an oversimplification, or a dulling down, or somehow a limitation of what is being interpreted. It's like in a dream. You know, you can say, I dreamed last night and I dreamed of driving in a car. It's like, no, there were no cars there. That's an interpretation. It was a pattern of virtual light appearing in my consciousness. Then I can say, it had a car-like shape, in the sense that it's something that's shaped like something or other I call a car, and I seemed to be in it, and it seemed to be a vehicle, which makes it car-like. But there's no car there. There was a light field, if that, whatever that is, right? And that's an interpretation too. But so then I can see, okay, car is interpretation, dream is actuality. And all of a sudden I see, no, it wasn't a car that was there. I'm calling it a car. I'm treating it as if it was a car, and how I'm thinking of it and how I'm addressing it. But there's no car there. And we discovered that exactly the same thing applies here. There's no people here. There's light or sound, right? There's no space here. There's no time here. There's just this presence, and it can be interpreted as if it was space, as if it was time, as if there were people present, as if there was communication. But all of those interpretations are overlays onto something that is fundamentally other than the interpretations. And that's the important thing to notice. The raw material, the starting point of the interpretation is just this flash of presence.
Right.
Like if you were let in here blindfolded and with earplugs and all of a sudden the blindfold was taken off, what would happen? You'd see a pattern of light and you wouldn't know what it was. And then almost instantly your mind would come in and say, oh, I'm in a room and there's people. But for you to jump to that conclusion, you have to have the light present first. Or you might have been led to a dark cave where there's no people. But you wouldn't know that until the blindfold was off. And then you'd see darkness and you'd go, oh, maybe I'm in a dark cave and I'm alone. But again, the presence of the light, the presence of the experience has to precede the interpretation, because the interpretation is based on it.
And,
right?
And is it possible to have that experience purely? Or
totally. You do.
I intellectually, I guess I know that it is, but it seems like in my experience of reality, everything is glued together, and so it comes with.
Yeah.
That there is just this sort of streaming movie that keeps going on.
It comes with, but it doesn't get in the way of itself.
Uh-huh.
In other words, there's actuality, there's interpretations, and they coexist, but the interpretations don't actually block the actuality. They coexist with it, but they exist in their own sort of dimension.
So is it like another layer?
Yeah, you could think of it like that. A layer. Because think of it like this, for example, your field of vision is just a light. There's no interpretations in your field of vision. And then essentially, your intelligence has to create concepts, let's say. This is all a lot of bullshit, but anyway, let's just say it's as if your intelligence creates concepts and says, oh, this shape that is showing up in this field of light, it looks kind of like a person, and I'm going to call it a person. But that doesn't block the light. That doesn't stop the light's present. And we're used to intermixing them. We're used to thinking, no, that is a person.
Yeah.
But then you can, if you look more carefully with your experience, you can notice, no, there's light here. The eyes only see light. The eyes never see people. Eyes see light. Intelligence interprets the light as people. The ears only hear sound. There's a field of sound. The intelligence can interpret it as, oh, this is language. It's intelligent communication. Oh, this is a car driving by. It's not. But the ears don't know that. The ears just hear sound, let's say. And the sound doesn't stop just because it's being interpreted. And likewise, the light doesn't stop because the light happens at where light happens, let's say. And interpretation happens where interpretation happens. And they don't block each other, even though we're used to smearing them together. But it's possible to notice that they don't block each other. And you can do this by, for example, noticing, like we're used to having sound and light smeared together. You see my lips moving and you hear sound and you go, oh, it's all, it's just me talking. But again, if you look closely, you can see, no, you're seeing light, you're seeing movement of my lips in light, and there's no sound there. There's no sound in the field of light. And then if you can hear the sound of my words, and there's no lips moving in the sound of my words because you can't see them.
Are you lip syncing?
Huh?
You're like one of those little...
Milli Vanilli.
He's lip syncing.
I'm not even here.
Yeah. And I had an interesting talk with Jeff about his idea that the speed of light is so fast that anything we see or appear to see is actually just artifact.
Yeah.
Just sort of I was using the analogy of like when I was not feeling well and he came to my house, I'm used to thinking that I've done something to cause something and it's going to go here and here, when in fact this is just, the debris left over after the ball game.
Yeah.
That
because
I just need to kind of carefully clean up, and that, it's kind of an inverse view of how everything is.
Yeah, because interpretation is always an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, think of it this way: you're led and blindfolded into a space you don't know where you are, and all of a sudden the blindfold is taken off. There has to be presence of experience before there can be interpretation. By the time the interpretation kicks in, the initial presence of experience is long gone.
Yes.
I mean, it may be refreshed
Yeah.
with new experience that's not wildly different than what was there, but in actual fact, it's new. But you're still lagging way behind with your interpretation. So interpretations are always historic.
Yeah.
You're actually interpreting what happened, not what's happening.
Right. And we're so used to thinking that what we're thinking is actually about going forward,
Right.
this directionality, which, in fact, who knows, I mean, has no relationship. That's why the whole notion of karma is completely misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because, we keep thinking we'll do X and then it'll cause Y, when in fact X is just a reflection of something.
Yeah, and it already happened.
And so it's been interesting to think about things from that.
And yet, even though the interpretations are lagging behind, the real-time functioning happens instantaneously in real time.
Continues.
Yeah, so what you think you're doing is an echo, but what you're doing is preceding your interpretation of it, and is already a done deal. I mean, you take a sip of water, and you've already taken a sip of water and drunk it before you even know you're taking a sip of water. Essentially, I mean, there may be an infinitesimally small gap, but still, it's the same principle.
No, it's very interesting.
Yeah. So functionality happens as direct energy engagement. It doesn't happen conceptually. And then our conceptualization and interpretation is always playing catch up. It's always like, just like saying what happened, what just happened. But the doing happens before the interpretation, so the doing is nonverbal.
Right. I mean, and it's interesting in light of apparent conflict with other people, because, it has nothing to do with the present moment. I mean, it has to do with something from long ago and far away that is seems to be appearing now, but in fact...
and again, the actual conflict is direct energy engagement. But what you think it is about and what you think is going on is just a lot of bullshit. I mean, it's free association. It's the S word. But the actual engagement has already happened, and that happens. That's the inherent intelligence. The inherent intelligence is not a logical interpretive intelligence. It's an actual intelligent energy engagement that happens in real time. And all functioning is that. So when you do anything, the doing of it precedes any thought of what you're doing. And that is the inherent intelligence that does it. So that's why functionality is and can be very, very intelligent. I mean, your metabolism is a perfect example. Your metabolism happens in real time as a direct energy engagement. It's inconceivably intelligent. The amount, the system that is being regulated and that is functioning and that is engaged with its environment and all that is inconceivably complex and subtle and equilibrated dynamically and so on and so forth. It's not because you're thinking of it. It's not because you have any idea what you're doing. And yet, you are doing that completely. Just like when you take a drink of water, you are doing that completely. And when you talk, talking isn't really talking. Talking is direct energy engagement. And then the mind plays catch up and says, oh, I'm talking, what am I talking about? Oh, I'm hearing words, what am I hearing about? But the actual talking and the actual communication has already happened.
Yes.
So we're having a conversation, but the communication happens before we know what it was about.
Yeah.
And it extends way beyond what we think it's about.
I mean, in fact, that may be why I sometimes have trouble picking up what's actually going on.
Of course.
It's like...
Yeah. And that's fine.
I know what... I mean, that whole thing of, knowing, the trusting, the experience of things, and then not necessarily being able to put words around them or to interpret what's actually gone on.
Yeah, but that's what's important. I mean, humans have it all asked backwards because we generally place a big premium and a big priority on our ability to bullshit, and say what we're doing and come up with elaborate excuses and elaborations and diversions verbally and conceptually. But in actual fact, all of that is just a way, is icing on the cake. What really matters is direct energy functioning, which is wholly non-conceptual. And that's where the primary intelligence is. That's where the importance is, and most fundamentally, that's where the power is. Your power, your effectiveness, is wholly non-conceptual. It's wholly, in the flash of your instantaneous engagement with your being, with your experience, and it happens directly and automatically, but very intelligently. But it's not a conceptual intelligence or an intelligence you need to muster up. But it's the actual intelligence that you have. That's the inherent intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, even in terms of this whole notion about planning and what to do, which really is. I mean, I've just been noticing that if I look and see what's actually happened, it's more informative to me than what I think might be happening.
Yeah, sure. And decisions, you can tell decisions are always made long before you know it.
Yeah. I've been noticing that too, that I, rather than procrastinating about what to do, that I've noticed that, like, the decision's already made.
Yeah. It's made when it is, and you may or may not notice it and acknowledge it at some point, which may be real quick, or it may be a long time, or it may be never.
Yeah.
But it's irrelevant because decisions happen in real time. They happen when they happen.
But there's something about being more, current with that.
Sure.
That relationship between experience and reality.
Well, it's important. I would say it's important to notice it. But again, you don't need to stay with it because you already are with it.
Okay.
You can't not be with it, actually. But you can be distracted from noticing that you are with it. In other words, your real-time functioning is already happening. It's not something you need to do.
Yeah.
It's already a done deal. It may or may not become more efficient or more polished if you notice it more profoundly. But that's not important.
There's no benefit in that.
Not necessarily,
no.
no. But noticing that there are these sort of two layers or two modes, like noticing the layer of actual real-time being, real-time energy engagement, immediate energy engagement, and then noticing this other layer of abstraction, interpretation, and so on, and noticing that they are not actually one and the same. One is like a pale echo and shadow of the other, which is in full technicolor and fully all on all the time already. And then you learn that you can trust this because you are trusting it. You always have been trusting it because it's you. You can't not be it. You've always have been just this real-time engagement. I mean, the present is here and you're in it. Whether or not you're thinking about it in echoes doesn't matter because what you're thinking about you are in. So you are on the cutting edge always, even if you aren't letting yourself notice it by distraction.
The interpretation's like a mini-me
Oh, sure. It's a caricature.
that comes in right after me.
Yeah, sure.
Does the interpretation have any reference to any real-time?
Yeah, well, interpretation refers to nothing else than actuality, but it does it very poorly and very partially.
But I mean, if it comes after the fact, then how could it have? I mean, could it really have any kind of reference or meaningfulness to the actuality?
Well, it has a meaningfulness as a milieu of distraction. You can sort of wallow in it and think you're in it as a distraction from being on the cutting edge that you actually already are on as well in your direct functionality. And whether or not that's actually effective is irrelevant, and I don't really know. But it's your actual experience is much more multidimensional than any interpretation could be. Interpretations are going to be small, they're going to be little, they're going to be lifeless, they're going to be dull. Whereas actuality, real-time experience it's huge, it's vast, and you are there. You are huge and vast in real-time experience. So if you're used to wallowing in your interpretive experience, you're going to feel small, you're going to feel dull, you're going to feel, out of it to some degree or whatever. Whereas if you just notice this flash, all of a sudden, bang! You're there, you're here, you're huge, you're anything, you're everything. You're totally already meeting everything as it happens, effortlessly and hyper competently. And letting yourself notice that, you can appreciate a vastly different feeling tone of what you are and how capable you are and how functional you are. And you can experience yourself as, wow, I'm this ultra superhuman hyper intelligence. In fact, I am that. And I may be used to thinking of myself as a human being with a history and a life and blah 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 blah. But all of that is just a little bitty story happening in this astounding energy event.
It's really this that's experiencing everything anyway.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure.
It's not really.
It is this hyperintelligence, it's this cutting-edge hyperintelligence that actually does the fantasizing and does the interpreting too. But it does it kind of as an afterthought. It's like a little thought bubble. So like all of this is going on, there's this little thought bubble coming on over here going, oh, I guess I'm sitting here in the room having a conversation with people. But that's little, and then this is, it's already happened, it's already totally engaged, it's already totally, irrationally, actually happening.
But it's also a thought bubble.
In a sense, sure. It's nothing in particular. You could say that. But or everything. Two different ways of saying the same thing.
But what is? There really isn't a flash, right? It's just one continuous flow of.
There's no
light.
continuum. There's no flow. There's just now. And the way in which now seems to be a continuum is an aspect of its inconceivable weirdness.
Well, for me, I don't quite understand these flashes of light because.
No, there's only one flash of light. And yet that one flash of light happens to continually look different than itself.
Okay.
Which is what we interpret as time, but it's still just now. Think of it as time. It's always now.
Yeah.
That now is another word for the flash of light.
Okay.
How about now? Still now. How about now? Still now. Same flash of light, but it looks different. So how does that work? I don't know. There's no way to sort it out. It's miraculous. It's weird. It's non-linear. It's not anything you can interpret or make sense of or model. But the important thing is, it is actual. It is this right here. It's nowhere else. It's no when else. And this right here is the entirety of it. So it's not a small piece of a vast extension. This right here is everything. There's nothing whatsoever. There's not even an actual nothing other than this right here, right now.
And so, what is infinity again? In that context?
Infinity is the fact that this actuality cannot be comprehensively analyzed. In other words, this is literally an infinite range of information.
That,
While still being just this right here, right now.
okay, so then when you say there's no continuum and there's no flow, then there's just like...
Continuum and flow is a word for this right now. And this right now happens to look as if it was a continuum of flow, which is fascinating and strange and weird and miraculous. But the important point is that if there is a continuum, it is this right here, right now. If there is a flow, it is this right here, right now. And how does that work? I don't know. You got me. The important, you can. You can access the totality because it's this right here. This right here is not a small piece of anything. This is the whole shooting match right here. This is the entirety of the Atman. This is the entirety of the divine. This is the entirety of your being. This is the entirety of the universe. Just this right here. And it's not like this is a little piece of something vast. No, this is the vastness. The vastness is right here. It's totally accessible. You can touch it.
So the fact that it's inconceivable is the infinity that you're speaking of.
Yeah, you can't sort it out. You can't get a handle on it. You can't make sense of it. You can't delimit it. You can't. No matter how you look at it, you'll always find more. It has no end. It's endless, while not being anything other than just itself and just this right here, right now. And that makes absolutely no sense, and that's the point. It doesn't make sense. It makes absolutely no sense. It's irrational, but it's true. It's actual.
This being inconceivable doesn't mean it's not knowable.
Right, absolutely. It's totally knowable, totally accessible. But you can't access it through conception, through conceiving of things.
Yeah.
The access is through direct energy engagement. You are it, and that's the access. So you access it because you access it the same way you access your body. You don't need to go somewhere to access your body. You've got all access. Here you are. And likewise, you have total access to this because here you are. Here it is. Because you already are completely engaged with it. And that engagement is most profound knowing. It is the essence of knowing. So you are, because again, it's intelligent. It's an inert or mechanical engagement. It's an engagement of complete intelligent assimilation.
Absorption.
Sorry?
Absorption.
Sure, yeah.
You can't not access it or
No.
not be absorbed.
No, all you can do is not notice that fact or imagine that it's other than that. But it's already a done deal. If the present moment is happening, which it always is, obviously, then that's a done deal. And then the farthest you can get from it is by not noticing that and constructing an imaginary distancing or smallness or separation or something.
Which isn't really happening in a sense.
No, it's totally not happening. It's completely imaginary. But it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a psychosis that you go into, and it seems to be a real world that you seem to be inhabiting. But it's a lie. It's not true.
Right. So the textual fact of this contact.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the power. That's why I always tell people, feel this energy. Go to the energy of your experience, because right away it's obvious that it's not a concept. It's not an idea. The texture of this experience is actual, and it's real time, and it's inconceivably informationally rich. It's inconceivably detailed, and it's not a thought. It's not an idea. And right away, you're outside of any little world you imagine yourself in, or any little identity you imagine yourself to be limited to. At first it can feel very schizophrenic. It can feel like, well, there's sort of me, and then there's this weird wow thing, and it can seem like there's sort of two worlds, but they're actually the same because the one generates the other.
Not to get that confused. I mean,
Yeah.
the one does generate the other,
Yeah.
rather than the other generating.
Yeah, no, for sure, exactly. You know, I mean that's the point. Is to reality is everything and does everything, including misinterpret itself. But the misinterpretation is done by reality and exists in reality. The misinterpretation isn't making reality.
So since it's inclusive, then conceiving is actually textual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So even being with conception as a textual presence undercuts. It totally undercuts and undermines. It blows the cover of the conception as being anything, and all of a sudden, wow, that's an energy flash too. Thoughts like that. I mean, the easiest way. A lot of people, it's the whole spiritual thing. I'm supposed to stop thinking. I'm stuck with my thoughts. It's like you don't need to stop thinking. Just see what thought is, and all of a sudden, bang! You're in this amazing light show of energy, transcendental energy present. I mean, what is thought? It's just incredibly bizarre,
It's what it is.
Yeah, it's what it is. But it is an actuality. It's an actual energy event, let's call it, right? And all of a sudden, when you're with that, you see this as an energy event, and the energy is intrinsically infinite or transcendental or whatever. And all of a sudden, what the thoughts claim to be about, the sort of the plot line or the storyline or something, is just melts away in irrelevance.
It's totally ass backwards.
Yeah, it's asked backwards from the normal human mode of approaching things.
The normal human form is the abstract.
Yeah.
In a sense, the world is kind of the actual schizophrenic, because I think I'm a body, and I actually believe my thoughts or my assertions, which is contradictory to being a body,
Yeah.
in a sense, where the things actually exist without my projection or my take on it.
Well, one of the things that I have been experiencing recently is that my awareness seems to be becoming finer, in the sense that I'm just noticing more of the experience and the awareness that's happening in whatever. And so that kind of feels different to me
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And of course, it's not actually becoming finer. You're just noticing how fine it is.
Yeah.
And that can progress infinitely. So it can continue to seem to be finer and finer and finer and finer. And it's not that it's actually becoming finer, it's that you are allowing yourself to appreciate how infinitely fine it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, in that, you enter into it more and more textually. You enter into experience as a range of essentially transcendental, but actual textures, textual presence.
And it also feels more detached. I mean, there's a more detachment to the experience.
Yeah.
And it's just everyday things, which is, I guess, this is reality. I mean, I have always thought that awareness or awakening is something other than all of this here, all of this awareness.
No,
but it's
other way
not.
around.
It seems to be that the awareness is really what it's all about. That's
Yes.
reality just
Yes, absolutely.
going on
And
in real
and
time.
this completely transcends our normal interpretations of it, even as it includes them.
Yeah.
So the interpretation, we're here with a bunch of people and we're sitting around in the room having a conversation, is true as far as it goes, But what's actually true is this astounding infinite textual presence, and that it can be said to be a bunch of people sitting in a room having a conversation is included in that. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
But the actuality is so much more subtle and vast and nuanced and finer, let's say, than that particular storyline. But it comes with. So it's, again, you don't need to throw one. You don't need to discard one to go to the other.
Yeah, I notice it more because it's like what's that all about, Instead of like just a regular kind of like interpretation or frame of reference or some narrative going on, it's like, oh.
Yeah, good. Yeah, actuality is really obvious when you let yourself notice it, and that is the most powerful thing you can do.
But it's nothing I'm doing. It's just all of a sudden.
Yeah, it just comes. Yeah, when it's time, it comes.
Yeah.
Totally. Which brings us back to maturing.
We went to a concert last night, and I had the feeling at that concert that the music was as good an interpretation of this as you can possibly get.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it doesn't have direct concepts built into it.
Oh, yeah.
And yet it has everything.
Again, music is explicitly direct energy engagement, which is an aspect of why it's so beautiful and so powerful. Any non-verbal or non-conceptual art is the same sort of thing. That's its power, is that it draws our attention towards the actuality and reveals the inherent intelligence, which of course is all value.
Yeah, this was a very powerful piece. I mean, we had a 220-person chorus.
Oh, wonderful.
And a full orchestra and soloists and everything. And it was just, we were in the front row. And it was just like...
Fabulous.
It was just, it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, wonderful.
And it was just this. I mean, but it was complete.
Yeah.
Because everything is complete.
Yeah. This is always complete, and anything that indicates or more directly draws our attention to this is of course also embodies that completeness. Yeah.
Which is really everything.
Well, ultimately it is, which is why the maturing happens. You have to really be a diehard to cling to your bullshit in the face of this ongoing onslaught of real experience. In the long run, sooner or later you're just an overload. It's like, okay, enough already. I get it.
Well, this interpretation is happening on a lot of levels that we're not even aware of.
Sure. Yes, but it's largely unconscious.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the discovery of this overlay of interpretation is, and the exposing of it is more maturing than that.
Yeah, that's the essence of maturity. Isn't it? But again, you don't need to deconstruct the interpreting. You don't need to deconstruct your confusion. On the contrary, just go to direct energy presence and it does the work for you. Because it reveals what it is, and in the context of what it is, the implicit framework, or let's say frame of reference of what it is, then it becomes clear what the interpretations are, not the other way around. If you tackle the interpretations head on, you're liable to do it by way of interpretations, which is just going to gum things up even worse. Whereas if you go to the direct energy presence, Yeah, you go to direct energy presence and everything becomes clear. Which I have euphemized as noticing.
Well, okay, it becomes clear, but it seems as if, I'm right with the direct energy presence, but I know that there's a whole lot of layers going on that's making me think that I'm with it right on the spot.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter because the layers aren't in the way of the energy. If you go to the energy, you are directly with the energy, whether or not the layers are there and whether or not they're sucking you in. And the energy trumps, the energy dominates, the energy wins. It's a tug of war that the interpretations cannot win because they have no mass. They have no force. The energy has all force and all mass. So when you go to the energy, it dominates, it wins.
You can also go to all the layers and be in the energy of the layers.
Totally. But that's where the energy.
You see that the layers are also that energy itself.
Exactly.
It's not any
we were
different.
talking about that a few minutes ago. Yeah, true. You can go to thought.
Those instead, because
Absolutely.
they seem to be the distraction.
Sure, but
So use them.
Yeah, absolutely. But the important thing again is to go to actual energetic presence. Let's call it textural presence, or I call it radiant presence often.
You're always going to have a viewpoint, though. I mean, there
What's
has
that mean?
to be a perspective. There's always going to be
It's only one.
your own particular way of experiencing it. It's not experience itself through a perspective.
No, there's no through. It doesn't.
Viewpoint itself.
No, it doesn't experience itself through any perspective. It generates perspectives. It generates apparent perspectives through its nature. But all perspectives are secondary to the event, and the event itself is ultimately transcendental. So it transcends perspectives even as it generates perspectives.
I was saying that I don't think you can separate that out.
You don't need to.
It's it from a perspective, as a perspective. It's it as a perspective.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because all perspectives ultimately exist in transcendence. So the perspective as any kind of a limiting factor turns out not to exist or to be irrelevant.
It's
And again,
that it's
I'm sorry?
that it is limiting. I mean, it's just a way of it being with itself, or a way of experience.
Yeah, but it's a way of it being with itself, but that way turns out not to be a way because it's infinite. It's not a way of being with itself as opposed to some other way. But don't worry about it. It's not important because again, it doesn't make sense. But if you go to direct presence, if you go to energy presence, if you go to textual presence, that itself explains everything. And that itself is its own perspective and generates all perspectives. It's like a dream is a good example again, as always. You can say, well, yeah, a dream is seen from a perspective. No, but the dream generates the perspective it's seen from. So to say the dream is seen from a perspective is to sort of be turning it on its head. Actually, the dream's absolute freedom. It can generate any perspective it damn well wants, and whatever perspective seems to be generated, the dream isn't constrained by that perspective. On the contrary, the dream is creating the appearance of that perspective. And likewise, the same thing happens here. So there may or may not always be some degree of perspective present, but it's not a limiting factor so much as it is just an aspect of what's happening. And perspective turns out not to be perspective, because again, when you go looking for perspective, you don't find anything specific or sharply defined that you can actually get a handle on. It's more of a nuance, it's more of an implication. And when you're looking for the actual thing, you don't really find anything.
Well, it's what you have. I mean,
Sure,
it's
maybe what you...
It's what's there. You can't get out of it. It's all...
Yeah, but there's no it to get out of. That's the point. You can't get out of it, but there's no it to get out of, so you don't need to get out of it.
It has no relevance.
It has no relevance. It has no definition. It has no edges. It has no containment.
But
It's an
there.
implication.
But it's there.
Sure, but what does it's there mean? It's there. It just simply means this.
I just think that it's huge because it's experience as that kind of experience.
Yeah,
And,
yes. Experience is that kind of experience.
And
But what that is absolutely bottomless and limitless and infinite. Even if it seems to be something more or less particular. You know, the whole thing doesn't make any sense at all. It's irrational. You know.
Well, you know, you can think of perspective, and if you can use a metaphor again of trying to identify a person, like I say, oh, I know Lily, but to imagine that I know Lily, Lily's a perspective in a sense, you could say, in defining her. And even thinking that we're seeing something from a perspective. We're trying to define the perspective, but we really don't. You can't.
Right.
Even the perspective, it's only a name for something that isn't really.
Yeah, that can't really be found. They're isolated
You
as
can't
actuality.
find it. You can't give it edges, parameters, perimeters, anything.
Yeah.
So, but there's always the feeling by the trick that you think it's a particular something. Just like I'm thinking Lily's a particular something, and Lily's not a particular something.
Right, sure.
No matter how I look at it.
Right.
Well, it is some perspective inside yourself, you know, inside of
But
current
even-
reality.
But
that-
it's
that
not-
somehow
But it's
identifies.
infinite.
But it's not an actuality
No,
because you
it's
can't
not an
find it as you can't pin it down.
No, but at least
It's an
that-
innuendo.
The understanding of that is at least a little closer to the truth of reality in seeing that, you
It's
know,
an innuendo.
everything that, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, that
No.
everything we see and experience and interpret is just another fragment of, you know, what's going on in ourselves.
Well, it's that for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Can't define
a good way to put it, again, let's go back to the dream. You know, a dream may, at certain times, may be rather amorphous and multidimensional and hard to pin down. Other times it'll seem to be something. You know, it'll seem to sort of have a little more coherence of, oh, I seem to be in a situation that these people here and I'm, that sort of comes into a focus again. But if you go, but that perspective that seems to be there isn't really a thing. It's an apparent coherence that seems to be there
That
by
isn't-
implication, but
isn't
it's not.
necessarily any more relevant than
Yeah,
any other.
not only not more relevant, but not even really very well defined or actual. It's more sort of it's more sort of an implication or an innuendo that if you went looking for it, you wouldn't actually find any coherence.
It's a bit like the range of colors, thinking something's more of a red than something else. Or
And
why
what's
don't
more,
we-
it changes from second to second, if you could call it that.
Yes. Why don't we have
commercial break? Is
yes commercial break?
running
Yes.
over.
We're going to have a 10-minute break now. We'll be back shortly.
so I think that what we were talking about was an important point because I think that it shows a misinterpretation or not a complete way of seeing this, which is to consider or to experience as a particular take
Right.
on things.
Yeah.
which I see as well, you could see it anyway. I mean, you can see it dualistically as a limitation or just, I mean, it's amazing that there is one, but it's also just a way as opposed to many, many ways.
Yeah, but it's subtle because particularity is not actually particular. In other words, things look exactly the way they look at any moment, but that exactly the way they look is not an exactness, and it's not a way of looking. And yet you can't make sense of that because the exact way that things are is not it's not exact and not a way. It's not other than what it seems to be, but what it seems to be is not what it seems to be. And that makes no sense, but it's true. So in other words, yeah, there seems to be a way things are, which would seem to be different from all the ways that they aren't. But in actuality, it's not like that. In other words, it's a seeming, but the seeming is, I've tried to put this often, and I usually put it in terms of specificity and indeterminacy coexisting. Which is a good way of putting it, but it may be a little abstract for people. In other words, a given moment looks specifically the way it looks. Right? You're seeing exactly the configuration of colors that you happen to be seeing at this moment, and so on, hearing exactly the sounds you happen to be hearing, and blah, 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 whatever, right? And yet, every single portion of what you are actually experiencing is indeterminate, i.e. is not one thing or another, even though it seems to be, and even though it is what it looks like. When you go looking at what's actually there, you find an infinity, which is it may be a subtle point, and that may sound like an abstraction, but it's actually addressing exactly the same thing we're talking about, which is that things seem to be the particular way that they seem to be at a given moment, but they aren't actually that way, or that the way that they seem to be is not in any sense a limitation, not in actuality, because it's the nature of infinity that it can look finite without being finite.
So is it like holographic?
Well, fractal might be a better way to put it, which means that when you look at it superficially, it seems to be, like you look at the Mandelbrot set, it's this funny little heart shape on his side, right? But it's like, okay, look a little closer, buddy. And all of a sudden, woo, all bets are off. You're just like, the shit hits the fan and you're just gone. You can't find where you are or can't tell what it looks like.
But holographic,
and likewise
in the
with
sense
this.
that everything is there in everything.
Yes, that too. That too.
You know what I mean? Like you think it looks like a certain thing, but actually, when you actually look, everything is there.
Yeah.
Always. There's never a moment when
that's
everything
true.
isn't there.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a lot of angles to try and approach this on, but ultimately you have to get it directly because it's not susceptible of analysis or description.
It sort of goes back to the thing about what your penchant is for approaching this.
Yeah.
What your particular.
Sure.
Whether you,
but this is an important point because this is also the point that where you discover freedom from karma, because things seem to be the way they are. Life seems to be what it says seem to be, which superficially looking seems like a limitation. It's the way it is, it's not some other way, I'm stuck in that. And yet it turns out there isn't actually any stuckness, because even though it seems to be a certain way, in that seeming is an infinity, is an infinite openness. In other words, you can't specify or find what it actually is, even though it seems to be a certain way. And again, that's difficult to formalize or to communicate, but it is actually fairly easy to see if you let go of sanity. or if you let go of insanity, let's say. In other words, the idea that specificity and indeterminacy are exactly the same thing is the kicker. In other words, things can seem to be precisely what they are and actually be nothing or anything in particular simultaneously, which is the ultimate truth of Buddhist emptiness, for example.
It's going to be different for each person or each.
That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant because there's only your concern is only you, and so it's only you to see, and each person is again you're jumping way into abstraction. And that may or may not be true, but it's irrelevant because it's not of any practical use.
It's actually not true. Because there is no other person.
Yeah, but again, that's a matter of practicality.
And this is the same regardless.
And there may be theoretical other people, but there aren't any practical other people.
Isn't that a relief?
In other words, I'm the only one here. But theoretically, you all might be here.
Who the fuck are we talking to? That's a relief.
Well, theoretically, I may be talking to people. Or I may be talking to myself in a weird hallucination, but hey. It's not important, really.
This leads us to ask, why are you really here on a Sunday night in May?
Well, it's not Sunday and it's not May. And I'm not here. But other than that...
He's talking to all these apparent people he sees around him.
Nice kid.
But there's also... the opposite is also true. That this
appears
is actually includes the reality that I see.
Yeah, the reality you see is this.
Yeah,
They're one and the same.
But the reality that I see...
Yeah, that's all there is.
It's all...
Wait a minute. The I being my ego type mind sees,
sure.
which is on one level doesn't exist,
right,
and on another level it is part of this.
Right.
So whatever you say about the personal opinion not being, or the personal point of view not being real, it is also real,
right,
even though it's not real.
Yeah, it's a small subset. It comes with this.
It comes with, yes, thank you.
Because this is doing that, so naturally that is included in this. But this is as it is vast and infinite, and that which that also is actually, but that can seem to be or claims to be something more specific in the face of an absolute non-specificity which actually exists. Or let's say a specific non-specificity.
Which brings up the fact that whatever one says, the opposite is also true.
Oh, always, yeah. Truth cannot be said. It's all bullshit.
Can we know it?
Right.
Can we know?
Absolutely.
But that being said, it seems to me that I seem to be, trying to zero in on some sort of parameter that is true in all circumstances.
Right.
And it's not anything tangible. It isn't anything to do with. It seems to be that emerges periodically, and that it's more emerging more and more. Where I'm beginning to see, or seem to think that I can see, that there is sort of something that just cuts through everything.
Yeah. Well, what this is true always. It's true in all circumstances. What this is always true. And, when I formalize that, I usually formulate it as radiant presence. So you could say that is always true. Or what I mean by that is always true anyway.
Right.
The statement is arbitrary. Calling it that is arbitrary, even if it's arguably useful.
I mean, it just sort of feels like it's a place to act from, or, you know, sort of, given that none of these other, you know, the linear parameters are of any consequence.
Right.
That seems that there is, you know, it's about like some sort of point of reference to do with why I'm even wondering what to do, or
right. But the important thing is the inherent reference, point of reference. In other words, why are you?
Yes.
Why have you always been?
Yes.
You know, the point that you have always been working from, whether you've acknowledged it or not, which is your actuality. You know, like we were talking about that earlier in terms of the cutting edge of sort of direct energy engagement. You know, and of course there's a lot of different ways to approach that and a lot of different ways to put it, but it refers to the same thing. Because that's the objectivity, the objective condition that, of course, is always the case. But again, trying to formalize that or capture that or define it or even indicate it is tenuous at best.
Yes. Although it does seem to appear and emerge like as a sort of a floating through kind of thing.
Yeah, you can become aware of it or know it with various degrees of clarity. But it's always there, it's always itself. Whether or not you are noticing it or whether or not you are, you know, appreciating it as it is.
It's of no real importance even to notice it.
No, it isn't. It's no importance actually, but it's useful to notice it because you get the nice side effect of liberation.
Just that.
The understatement of the century.
I know.
Of the the whole.
But in liberation, you don't actually gain anything. You just come to see what has always been the case, which turns out to be a real load off.
But that's a really big load off.
Well, it is. But it's actually a non-event because nothing changes.
Oh, right.
You simply discover what has always been the case, so it's not actually achieving something. It's not actually changing anything or achieving anything or leaving anything or arriving at anything, even though, you know, sort of in terms of feeling tone, it's huge.
Yes.
It's been a good talk tonight. We've been cutting close to the bone.
It hurts.
I think it hurts. Flesh is just falling off the bone.
Yeah. The bones.
No bone. Bone marrow.
No bones about it.
This feeling tone can be subtle or immense. And this is just an example that I sometimes go back to because it makes me think that there is something more, which was an expression of having discovered this. I have to get used to knowing how to move around in the world this way. Because the awareness of not being a particular person was so obvious. Now that is not subtle.
It's true.
Well,
But you also don't actually have to get used to it because you are used to it because you've always been moving. You've always been actually doing that, whether or not you've let yourself be aware of it. In other words, your actual functioning has never been from the point of view of being a particular person, even if you have been carrying around and generating a feeling tone that that's the case.
but the doing of that is
But
is-
the
is
doing it,
advance.
yes,
Having
for sure.
that
Yeah. No, I hear you. Sure.
is like the difference between this and this. And,
Sure.
So that is something other than just recognizing this.
It's not
I
really.
mean,
I wouldn't say it's other than. It's an aspect of recognizing.
It's an
it.
aspect of it. So
Uh-huh.
it's a recognition of this from another point of view.
Okay, sure.
Well, which I'm trying to get at, which interests me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I see this as this. But it's not a radical way of experiencing this, other than what I've always recognized it to be as, just the miracle of it happening at the time.
Cool.
Because I've got a perspective, I have something else is there going. Something else is happening.
Sure, that's okay.
Identity.
Right. Right. But this miraculous being is doing that. So that comes with this, not the other way around. And this miracle is not limited by that, even though it generates that and may be occasioned by with that.
So is it because I'm seeing it a certain way?
Yeah, you're used to. Yeah, you have a pet way of seeing it, or let's say a pet range of ways of seeing it that you like to hang out in. But you aren't forced to hang out in it. Again, it's like the example I've given a few times of, you live in a 1,000,000-room mansion, and for some reason there's 2 rooms in the basement that you like to hang out in. You're not forced to hang out in them, but for some reason you hang out in them. But if you explored, you would find that you could go into other rooms, which in the mansion would seem very different from each room you were in.
So the exploration happens by
Curiosity. And discovering that it's possible.
go and going to what? The curiosity. I mean, I've got the curiosity.
Sure. You do a lot of exploring. You already are doing that. You play around with a lot of different points of view.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
I want those. I'm interested in getting out of that door.
But you do get out of it. You may go back, but you get out of it. I've seen it many times. I see it all the time. I've seen it here tonight several times. It's just a matter of acknowledging when it happens, rather than thinking of that as some kind of a hiccup in your normalcy. It's not a hiccup, and there's no normalcy. Your normalcy isn't just a hiccup, and that's a different hiccup, and there's other hiccups that are possible too. Hiccups all the way down. And each mode is just another room that is possible to be in. That's another perspective that is possible to be with this from.
Now, something is recognizing the modes, and something wants to move around in them.
Sure. Sure. That's great. So take advantage of that. You employ that. You surf that. Play with it.
That something feels like a mode, feels like an identity.
Well, maybe, but it's not important. You don't need to worry about what it is or isn't. You just use it.
It's not important.
No, of course not. None of these modes or perspectives are important in themselves. You just the point is to use them. Whatever they claim to be, use them. Use them as vehicles of exploration. And they may claim to be you, or may claim to be reality, or may claim to be normalcy, or may claim to be abnormalcy, or whatever. But that's of no importance. That's just their PR. But you can use them as ways of exploring, as vehicles for exploring possibilities within this. And the more possibilities you explore, the more you'll triangulate on the openness of this and the limitedness of this and the fact that all of these different points of view are quite viable within this, and none of them are any truer than any other one. And that's how you discover freedom. Right? You follow that?
Yeah. There's a kind of an undercurrent of truth that each mode seems to carry with it
Sure.
a flag of truth.
Sure. And that's okay.
Isn't, you know,
Well, but it is truth,
Well,
because each mode
it's
truly
true
exists
itself.
within truth, within reality, within this. And because this is true, the different modes which this generates claim to be true, and they are true as this.
claiming to be.
But don't worry about their PR. You just use them, employ them. Be very mercenary with them, and use them up and spit them out. Move on to the next one.
What about the sense of karmically being bound by a certain mode? I refer when I'm experiencing that as like a wisdom of no escape.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And that is true, and is valuable in its own terms, but ultimately, within any mode like that, you can discover that the mode is not what it seems to be, because it's actually made of infinity. It's made of openness. It's made of indeterminacy. So even as it is what it seems to be, and it seems to be what it seems to be, it is also not that. And so in that, without it needing to be other than it is already other than it is, and so it's ultimately non-entrapping. And you can discover that again by direct sort of textual exploration or presence or whatever. In other words, you don't need to cease karma to be free of karma. It's like, again, the dream is a perfect analogy. When a dream is, I'm stuck in this dream, I'm in this horrible situation, whatever it is, right? But then all you need to do is get that you're dreaming, and all of a sudden you're not stuck. Without needing to stop, you don't need the pattern to go away, but when you see it's just a pattern which is made of nothing, all of a sudden it's not entrapping. Without needing to go away, without needing to be different than it is. And that's how we become free of karma. The simplistic fantasy of becoming free of karma is you have to erase everything and have a plain vanilla, so all you're experiencing is sort of a dull white life.
Moving to another country.
Yeah. But it's not like that. Whatever patterning appears is actually built of unpatternedness.
Yeah.
So, that's the back door. That's your PowerPoint. Because that way you find freedom without needing to be free of circumstances. Because circumstances aren't really circumstances.
I wish it seemed that simple when there's certain things that stand out, like social anxiety or finances and things like that.
Yeah. Well, you have to come to that. Again, you have to sort of build up your chops of being able to access that. But ultimately, that's your best friend as you move into being able to take advantage of it. But even knowing that it's there, even intuiting vaguely that it's there, will enable you to begin to take advantage of it. And again, it might seem to come and go and so on and so forth. You have good days and bad days and whatever.
But it seems like loneliness, it's like there's certain attachments or agreements and friendships and things that it's sort of, the way that it happens here is I just don't know what to do with that, It's easy to say, you know, but it seems so solid, you know. They seem so they happen over and over again.
Right.
It seems like that in that sense.
Yeah. Well, you know, it may be that the way you're working with your energy at the time, that's relevant for you. But ultimately, the same thing is true of that. I mean, ultimately, in all of these circumstances, the objective circumstances in themselves are not important. You're really working with your own energies. And the objective circumstances just provide a convenience for you to explore your own energy.
So it's not about the finances or the loneliness per se.
No. They're just showing up. They're just showing up as a vehicle for you to play with your own energy.
They seem like walls, and I'm in it. You know.
Yeah. No, I understand that.
Yeah.
And they are. It's not that they're not there, but what is there as them is more than it seems to be, and ultimately is not entrapping. And you find, you know, the trick with all this stuff is you discover, you know, what makes walls seem solid is resistance. Okay, and when you aren't fighting with something, when you aren't pushing or pulling on it, all of a sudden it opens up.
I've played with the, you know, noticing you say, you know, when you're not noticing, kind of let it go and, you know, check it out when you are noticing.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know if I'm doing it or not, you know. But it sounds like a good idea. But it seems like these things are so solid, you know, at times. So.
But always solid.
Well, of course not. But right when it's like when the idea of that it might be solid, it firms up, you know. I've heard that, you know, that, you know, when you relax into it, you're actually resisting it. John said that the other day, but you know, it didn't seem to help.
Yeah. Well, you know,
it's a bit, you know, it feels like it's lifelong, you know,
Sure.
kind of thing. You know, the story comes with it that, you know, since I was young and my mom didn't blah 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 or whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure. Well, you know, but there are these, you know, karmic patterns that show up in our life, like, you know, your body type or your, you know, financial situation or your, you know, skills or your failings. You know, you say you have a personality defect or whatever. It's like, okay, so I'm fucked, I'm scarred, you know, I'm warped. But, you know, and it's not that that's not the case, but it's not. But it's just it's like a color in your palette to work with, and again, you're ultimately working in something that's more like a dream than it is like a prison. So it's a, you know, I mean, again, it's a texture that ultimately you discover this infinity.
Oh, so go to the direct contact.
Yeah, without ducking or resisting or trying to escape from or avoid the superficial aspect.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes a vehicle, because if you need things to be different, you're screwed.
Yeah.
That is what jails are made out of. Jails are made out of wanting or needing things to be different. You're absolutely screwed if that's your mode.
I tend to get to that point where I just go, I'm screwed. You know, there's no escape,
sure.
And then I go, you know, it's like. But I hear what you're saying.
But in that case, you go through it, you let go of it. So I'm screwed means as a way of, okay, this is how it is. Okay, cool. But then what is the this that is how it is? And that's where it turns out to be permeable. That's where it turns out to open, you know, with the textural presence of what it is. And functionality is discovered there, because all these things present themselves, and the mind generates fantasies of screwedness and what am I going to do, and there's no way out of this. But in the actual circumstance, and you know, the next moment will come and something will happen, and then the next moment will come and something will. So there's a functionality, there's a way of working through things that shows up in actuality, in spite of our catastrophizing fantasies of how bad it could be, or how stuck we are, or how we don't know what to do. You know, and again, this is because the flow of events, let's say, is again a textual presence, and it's ultimately transcendental. Not even ultimately transcendental. It's specifically and immediately transcendental. And in that, miraculously, you sort of slip through things. I mean, you know, you have all these circumstances, and yet here you are. And what's the problem right now, right here, right now, you know? There's no problem. And something comes up and you say, yeah, but I have this facing me and that facing me. It's like, yeah, but in any given moment, there you are, and everything's cool, you know? And then things happen, and then there you are, and everything's cool. And that'll continue to be the case basically forever. And what it looks like will continually shift and change to smaller degrees or greater degrees, you know. But in this, in the slipperiness of what this is, there is this continual get out of jail free card. There is this continual miraculous, you know, you triumphing over everything. I mean, all these circumstances are there, but they all sort of swirl around you. You know, you're the monarch in your universe, and they're the little sort of the
Gotcha. Yeah.
the little cast of thousands,
Yeah.
the plot twists.
Yeah.
But you're the star of the soap opera.
Could I look at it like I'm in that mansion, and the things that I'm facing, whether they're real or not, kind of like look at them as they're what they are, like defects, character defects, or whatever. But like it's a structure in the house, and I can
Right,
walk
exactly.
somewhere else.
Yeah, it's not that it's not a fact, but it's not actually a limitation. You know, it's a fact in the sense that you have to work around it, but you can work around it, and you're not stuck behind it in any actual sense.
Yeah. Then I'm not denying.
Yeah. In other words, nothing actually pins you down.
Yeah.
You can move around anything.
Even though I am defective.
Well, there's nothing but defects. I mean, all patterning is defect just by virtue of limitation. You know.
It's really a trick of awareness, focusing habitually, if you could use that word, on particular objects in this mansion, so to speak. Instead of seeing that there are a whole shitload of other rooms, and there's a door that leads to the garden, and there's the sky.
Yeah, it's too narrow a focus. It's obsession with, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at that, and okay, they're there, but like, so's this and that and the other and this and that, and then all of a sudden you're in this vast panorama.
Yeah.
And that's there, but like, who gives a shit? It's this tiny little blade of grass in a vast prairie, you know.
And the real important feature is really the awareness, or this, whatever you want to call it, and all those things are just colors and shapes and sounds and textures in your dream, in effect, in your dream castle.
I like it.
I'm so glad, honey.
And sometimes when you look at a more broad perspective, and then you look back at the things that you felt were limiting before, they seem to have changed somewhat.
Yeah, of course.
Like they suddenly don't look quite like they did before.
Yeah, because again, everything is indeterminate, and something that seems to be a certain way is actually other ways as well. And you may hold it as, maybe used to holding it as being, it's this way. And it's not that it's necessarily nothing, and it's not that it's not the way you see it, but it's also other ways simultaneously. Everything is infinitely multi-dimensional and has all sorts of loopholes. And
I seem to check those things through my friends and things like that. People who I try to talk with. I don't like this.
That's iffy. That's iffy. Watch out. Watch out. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Hence the loneliness.
Yes.
I hear you.
Especially
Don't hang out with your friends.
Definitely. So shoot yourself through the head.
What about the perspective that which is seeing this actually has no qualities?
But that's an abstraction. You can't find a that which has no qualities which is seeing this. All you find is this.
Right.
You can't find anything that's experiencing presence. All you find is presence itself. Consciousness is a myth. Awareness is a myth. It's a claim. You know, it's a logical construction. You know, this is present, and it's being experienced, so there must be some consciousness that's experiencing it. You can't find any such consciousness.
Well, you can find feeling that experiences this.
No, you find feeling. Anything you find is experienced. You can't find anything that experiences. Why does there need to be? Suppose there's no experience. There's just experience, and that doesn't make sense. But who says it has to make sense? Suppose there's just presence, and nothing's experiencing it. It's just present. How is it present? I don't know. It's miraculous. I mean, sure, awareness has no qualities because it doesn't exist.
Right.
Consciousness has no qualities because it doesn't exist. Of course it has no qualities. But all that shows up is presence, and presence is nothing but qualities.
Right.
So there is presence, there are qualities, you know. Consciousness is just a big red herring, you know. It's another thing for people to go psychotic.
Well, I think for some people it's another way of saying presence. You're calling it presence, but that's a myth too.
Sure.
What is presence?
Well, presence is actuality. By presence, I'm referring to this actuality.
Right.
That is.
Right.
And the
Calling it this,
evidence
but if I
of that
use
is
the word
all of
awareness,
this, is all of these qualities.
But to me, the word presence and awareness are interchangeable. It's the same thing.
Okay. Sure.
It's because there's nothing else.
Sure. Okay.
If you mean awareness to be, say, thinking, that's different.
So, it is about the presence, and this is present, and it's
This is
awareness.
present. That's the
But
fact.
One of the, not but, forget about the but, but
Forget about the bud, but
Well, we like the butt.
what I want to say is, one of the practices that I've recently been doing is, if I notice in my awareness that there's any pulling or pushing of the energy, then I know that I'm in a interpretation or a narrative, and then I start to look into that. And when I start to look into that, I get some clarity, and then it just goes away.
Yeah.
There's some kind of dissolution there. It just kind of goes away.
Yeah.
So that's kind of I don't know if that's what noticing is.
Sure, that's a good trick.
But that's this pushing and pulling, which is always going on.
Yeah.
And even something we were talking earlier about defects. In one of my environments, I always thought that I had this defect, and it just disappeared just this month, because I realized that if there's any they out there, think it's a defect, but it's actually reality. It's not it's not anything that I created or that I manufactured. It's just it's reality, and it's okay. And it was a lot of pushing and pulling going back and forth, and it's just kind of gone now.
Good, yeah.
So
pushing and pulling is always a symptom of interpretation.
Yeah,
which may or may not, and usually is unconscious.
Yeah, but that's still presence. Right?
Sure, absolutely. When you go to the fact itself, you go to presence, and in presence there's no pushing and pulling, and yet presence is intrinsically a radiance. It is intrinsically there's no word for it. It's intrinsically
it's texture.
It's a dynamic, active doing. It does everything. It is a doing. It is a. When I say presence, I try to indicate it as a positivity, and positive not in the sense of good versus bad. Positive in the sense of positing, of pushing forth, of shining forth, which is active.
Or an opening. It feels like an opening.
Sure, opening's fine, but the point is, it's not a neutrality. It is a dynamic activity.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Which we experience as the flow of events.
Right.
It's that force which is doing everything. It's the radiance. It shines forth, and in the shining forth, everything is accomplished. Everything is done. Not that there is anything, and not that there's any doing, but nonetheless, the shining forth is all of that. It encompasses all of that, and encompasses all of the internal doing and efforting and motivation as well. That's actually It's the radiance that's doing all that. And interpreting as that, it is personal, is a misinterpretation.
Okay, okay, that's good. I can explore that. I don't think I've kind of experienced radiance, but maybe it's been there and I haven't noticed that. So maybe, I mean, I just
All this is it. You've never experienced anything but radiance.
Oh.
It's very simple. It's not anything slippery. Oh, it's very slippery. It's very obvious.
So Peter, here's a question from the chat room, which has been very lively, actually. Is there anything being done? Is there anything to do? Is everything already done by the time that we experience it?
The experiencing is the doing, and there is nothing being done, and there's nothing to do. In other words, it's not like that.
What?
It's not like that. None of those questions are relevant.
None of the above.
None of the above.
Wow, they say.
I'll see your wow and raise you to a wowee.
Yeah.
Now, what this is and what's happening here is absolutely inconceivable. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's absolutely beyond the beyond. It's so totally miraculous. And how can you wrap your head around a miracle? How can you possibly make any sense or get any handle on a miracle? So any of these kinds of questions, as well-intentioned as they are just so hopelessly simplistic in the face of what the actuality is. If you can even frame a question, it's already wrong just by the fact that it's frameable. Because what this is vastly beyond anything that could be, any parameter that it could be looked at in terms of.
Well, that last question, is everything already done by the time we experience it? I mean, I think, doesn't that sort of relate to what we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, but it's not accurate. It's an oversimplification that is so oversimplified it doesn't apply.
Right.
It may be useful to demolish certain even heavier oversimplifications, but in itself it's not at all true.
Right. I mean, because it's sort of so linear, and reality
It's not absolutely
radiates.
non-linear.
It doesn't
Yeah.
act linearly or make sense.
Yeah, it makes absolutely zero sense. Zero sense. Probably a negative sense even.
Probably what?
Negative sense.
Oh.
Beyond zero.
Yeah.
And that makes no sense at all.
Well, to the extent I experience, I mean, it's just totally inexplicable. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, I would accent on the totally.
It's...
totally inexplicable.
Completely. How could something, on one hand, just like I say, be right in my face?
Yeah.
Like that. And yet... lighter than ephemeral. I mean, lighter than anything you could even...
Yeah. It's so obvious, it's so specific, it's so objectively, heavy-handedly the case, and yet you completely can't find it.
Yeah.
There's nothing there.
Yeah, that's the other way you say it.
And how does that...
Find it.
It's like, if you see the truth of that, you either go completely insane, or you get enlightened. Because there ain't no middle ground. There's no other way to be with it. It's like, it just does not compute. It's like telling a computer to divide by zero. You may as well just send it to the junk heap, first.
Well, I mean, to the sense that I've always heard about enlightenment and being, quote unquote, peaceful or blissful, blah, blah, blah. There is I guess that's what you were talking about earlier about liberation. I mean, there is sort of that freedom that comes from not having to explain it or do anything with it.
It's the freedom of not having to be sane.
Not having to be what?
Sane.
Well, it's the greatest sanity, though.
Well, it's the greatest sanity, but it's the greatest sanity by transcending the need to be sane.
Right.
Well,
Which, of course, is the actual sanity.
Yeah.
All human ideas of sanity are total insanity.
right.
Straight
I was
jacket.
gonna say, yeah, don't confuse the matter by saying it that way.
So I guess I also I have a confusion about experience. So,
Uh-huh.
so what is experience again?
Radiance.
Presence.
But
This radiance.
But I thought experience was more like the dream, my dream.
What's a dream? A dream is like radiance. What is a dream? Okay, so let's say experience is like a dream. What's a dream?
Well, dream is just.
This.
Well, I'm talking about not. I mean, awareness of the. So. So when we talk about stuckness, I mean, what is that?
Well, what is it? What do you think it is?
It's, well, I don't know. I mean, because I get when I try to get into focus, meaning getting into focus with my experience or my dream, then that's when I get into trouble.
Right.
If I just stay with awareness
Uh-huh.
and whatever else is there is whatever else I feel or I think or I interpret is the dream part.
Okay. Well, stuckness is holding things to be a certain way.
Right, right.
And experience is what is actually present that is not any particular way or another.
So then it's
In other
just-
words, experience is what is being interpreted as being one way or another that generates stuckness. But the raw material of the interpretation is experience.
okay.
In other words, experience is this that is present, and then you may say, this that is present is a room with people in it having a conversation. That's holding it to be a certain way,
Right.
which may imply a certain stuckness. But what that interpretation arises from is this presence.
Right. Okay.
Because before you say it's a room and before you say it's people, it's still this.
Mhm.
And then there has to be a this for you to interpret.
Right.
You aren't starting with pure blackness and interpreting people in a room. You're starting with something, that there's a presence, and on the basis of that presence you're supposing A, an objectively existing space and time, B, other entities, C, bodies, one of which you seem to be inhabiting and maybe other people seem to be inhabiting other bodies, and D, they're communicating with each other, making sounds at each other and various other direct psychic means and whatever, blah, 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 blah. In other words, all these interpretations, in other words, which is holding this to be a certain various ways, is based on an actual experience. There is actually something being experienced, even though you don't know what it is. And as soon as you think you know what it is, you're holding it to be a certain way. That's an interpretation. See what I mean?
So we could never know the raw experience.
You know it, but you can't say what it is. As soon as you say what it is, you're interpreting.
Oh, wow, that really is slippery.
Yeah.
Well, then you can't.
But
You
you
can't
can't-
avoid it either, right? I mean, so
Can't
it's-
avoid it.
So it's not.
Never
like-
goes away.
Yeah.
So then we get into trouble when we try to hold this other than what it really is.
Yes. That's how. The only way you get into trouble is holding this as something.
Okay.
That's how we trip ourselves up. That's how we feel stuck. That's how we experience suffering. When you see that this is just this and you can't say what it is, that's freedom. this is this, and that's what experience refers to, is this actuality. You can't say what it is, and yet you're free to say anything. You're free to say it's anything, and we do, of course. And as soon as you do that, then you've generated an interpretation, i.e. a storyline, a narration of what's happening. But that narration is always based on and occurs within the context of actual presence. The presence of experience. And even though you can't say what it is in its own terms, even though you can't define it, you can know it most intimately. But you know it, you don't know it conceptually. You don't know it by describing it. You know it by a non-linear, irrational, intelligent embracing. You know it by feeling it.
So you know it by presence.
Yes, exactly so.
So then I'm not really anything that I think I am.
Exactly. Anything you think you are is an interpretation. What you really are is this field of presence.
So that's what we're really kind of like, if, as it were, shedding is just what we think we are.
Yeah. You know, and you don't need to stop doing it. You just need to see that it's a small event that occurs in the context of this undefinability.
Right. And that's the noticing and the clarity that you speak of.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly so.
Makes sense.
If it makes sense, I didn't say it well enough.
It doesn't make sense.
Good. Better.
So here's another good question from Gus. So the sense of always having been here that I have is actually a dynamic, i.e. radiance, experience, etc.
Yes. Except the interpretation of a having been is confusion. There's just is. There's no past tense and future tense. There's not even really any present tense, but there's definitely no past and future tense.
Well, always been, maybe I left out a word, always have been here.
Yeah, but always have been.
Yeah, have
puts it extends it historically, and there's no history is definitely a myth.
Yeah, he says, yeah, I get it. Thanks. Sorry for being sloppy.
Yeah, watch that.
Watch that language,
Shape up.
Gus.
Shape up.
Might have to ban you.
I don't know. Language isn't going to get anyone banned from the chat room. It's stupidity that's going to get them banned.
No, it takes a lot for me to push that ban button.
Well, tonight's been very good. We've gone to a lot of profound views.
Yeah.
Well, it's officially quitting time. So I wish everyone online a good night.
It's such a nice